Cabinet Pro allows numerous machining operations for any and all parts such as dados, arches, holes, circles, rectangle cuts, L-shaped and U-shaped cuts, horizontal boring, etc. However, this video is only concerned with the various possibilities existing for the drilling patterns that you can set up once for all appropriate parts of all appropriate cabinets. Although most of these drilling patterns will be placed automatically with Cabinet Pro's Smart CNC rules, we can also place custom drilling patterns as they are required. All of our drilling patterns will either change or remain the same as is appropriate for each drilling operation when we change the part's dimensions. Here I have changed both the width and length of this part. You will notice that some of our drilling patterns have appropriately stretched to correspond with the larger part, while some have remained constant and did not change because they were set up to remain constant. As a side note, Cabinet Pro's Smart CNC rules would automatically change these drawer guide holes to match the appropriate drawer guide pattern for a deeper drawer box. This screen is merely a setup screen, so the Smart CNC rules are not active here. Let's investigate the different possibilities that Cabinet Pro supports by starting with the simplest drilling pattern, drilling a single hole. To drill a single hole, we simply tell Cabinet Pro to make one hole and then place that hole wherever we wish in reference to any of the four corners of a given part. Or we can give the same X and Y coordinates for the first and last reference points and make the reference corners for each point the same. In this example, we have placed our single hole 5 inches from the left along our y-axis and 2 inches from the top along our x-axis. If we change the dimensions of our part, we will see that the hole remains in the same spot relative to the corner we referenced. Another drilling pattern we can define is that where there is equal spacing for holes drilled between two endpoints. Notice, by the way, that for this example I switched our measurement system from inches to millimeters. In this pattern, each hole between those two endpoints will be 96 millimeters away from each other, and on a part of this size we will have 13 holes. If I change the length of this part to 800 millimeters, we will now have 8 holes drilled 96 millimeters apart, with the first reference point on the left remaining constant and the last endpoint an increment of 96 millimeters from the right side. A third drilling pattern we can define is that where we want the increment between holes to be approximately a given dimension, in this case 8 inches, but the two endpoints we want to remain constant. When we change the dimensions of the part from 30 inches to 60 inches, we see that our two endpoints are at the same location as they were, and we now have a total of 8 holes drilled. But the increment has changed slightly to approximate 8 inches. When we keep the two endpoints a constant distance from one of the corners, then the increment will vary slightly based upon the part's dimensions. A fourth drilling pattern we can define is where we drill a given number of holes from our first reference point, in this case 10 holes, spaced a given distance away from each other, in this case 32 millimeters. When we make our part larger, we will find that we have the same pattern starting at the same point and drilling the same 10 holes. But what happens if we make our part so small that the 10 holes do not fit on the part? In this case, Cabinet Pro will determine that the part is too small to fit your 10 holes as you define them, and will therefore drill only the number of holes that will fit on the part. This feature avoids user error where the part next to this one on your nested sheet will not have unwanted holes drilled in it. If we change the part size once again, we will see that all 10 holes fit on the larger part. A fifth drilling pattern we can define is where we have a distance between holes and our endpoints defined by a percentage of the part's dimensions. Here we have our first hole defined by 30% of the part's lengths measured from the left side along the y-axis, and our last hole defined by about 20% of the part's length measured from the right side of along the y-axis, while both first and last holes are defined by 50% of the part's width measured along the x-axis. So when we are defining holes to be drilled by a distance between holes, we can define the endpoints by actual dimensions if we uncheck the percent sign, or define by percentages of the part's dimensions if the percent sign is checked. If we want any of the drilling patterns discussed in this video to stretch or shrink depending upon the part size, then we should have different reference points for the first and last hole being drilled. If we want the drilling pattern to remain constant, regardless of the part size, then our reference points should be from the same corner. So with the first and last reference points shown here, both being from the top right corner, these 4 holes will be drilled regardless of the size of the part. Here I have changed the part size to be 15 by 15 inches, and you will see that the same 4 holes are being drilled at the same location. When the various methods of defining drilling patterns are used for specific drilling applications, we find that our drilling will be correct regardless of the size of part Cabinet Pro is processing during its generation of CNC code.